Hello dear students, welcome back to the last session of history. Today we are on the last chapter, that is chapter number 11, buildings, paintings and books. Now let's begin the chapter. Marusami and the Iron Pillar. Marusami was so excited. His brother had propelled his wheelchair all along the dusty, stony path past the towering Qutub Minar and up the metal ramp. It had been tough, but now he was here, in front of the famous Iron Pillar. It was an unforgettable experience. So Marusami, his brother, had propelled his wheelchair all along the dusty stone path past the towering Qutub Minar. And then he took him to the metal ramp. Though it was very tough way, but still Marusami, he managed to cross the iron pillar and to stand in front of the iron pillar. So it was a very unforgettable experience for him. Now, metallurgy. Ancient Indian metallurgists made major contributions to the metallurgical history of the world. Archaeological excavations have shown that the Harappans were master craftsmen and had knowledge of copper metallurgy. They even manufactured bronze by mixing copper and tin. While the Harappans belonged to the Bronze Age, their successors belonged to the Iron Age. India produced highly advanced types of iron, forged iron, wrought iron and cast iron. The Iron Pillar. Story of the Iron Pillar, where Marusami somehow crossed the Qutub Minar and stood near the Iron Pillar. The Iron Pillar. The Iron Pillar at Mehrauli, Delhi is a remarkable example of the skill of Indian craftsperson. It is made of iron, 7.2 meter high, and weighs over 3 tons. It was made about 1500 years ago. We know the date because there is an inscription on the pillar mentioning a ruler named Chandra, who probably belonged to the Gupta dynasty. What is amazing is the fact that the pillar has not rusted in all these years. Now, buildings in brick and stone. The skills of our craftspersons are also apparent in the buildings that have survived, such as the stupas. The word stupa means a mound. While big and small, these have certain common features. Generally, there is a small box placed at the center or heart of the stupa. This may contain bodily remains such as teeth, bone or ashes of the Buddha or his followers, or things they used, as well as precious stones and coins. This box, known as relic cassette, was covered with earth. Later, a layer of mud brick or baked brick was added on top, and then the dome-like structure was sometimes covered with carved stone slabs. Often a path known as the Pradakrishna Patha was laid around the stupa. This was surrounded with railings. Entrance to the path was through gateways. Devotees walked around the stupa in a clockwise direction as a mark of devotion. Both railings and gateways were often decorated with sculpture. Find Amravati on map. On map 7, page 105. This was a place where a magnificent stupa once existed. Many of the stone carving for decorating the stupa were made about 2000 years ago. Other buildings were hollowed out of rock to make artificial caves. Some of these were very elaborately decorated with sculptures and painted walls. Some of the earliest Hindu temples were also built at this time. Deities such as Vishnu, Shiva, and Durga were worshipped in these shrines. The most important part of the temple was the room known as the Garbhangira, where the image of the chief deity was placed. It was here that priests performed religious rituals and devotees offered worship to the deity. Now, the great stupa at Sanchi, Madhya Pradesh. Stupas like this one were built over several centuries, while the brick mound probably dates to the times of Ashoka. The railings and gateways were added during the time of later rulers. Left sculpture from Amravati. Look at the picture and describe what you see. So look at the picture of Amravati and you describe what you can see from this picture. Often as the Bitaragaon, a tower known as the Shikhara was built on top of the Garbhagriha to mark this out as a sacred place. Buildings Shikharas required careful paintings. Most temples also had a space known as a mandapa. It was a hall where people could assemble. Find Mahabalipuram and Aihole on map 7. Some of the finest stone temples were built in these towns. Some of these are shown here. The stone temples. An early temple at Bhitargaon, Uttar Pradesh. This was built about 1500 years ago and was made of baked brick and stone. Top right, Monolithic Temples at Mahabalipuram. Each of these was carved out of huge single piece of stone. That is why they are known as monoliths. While brick structures are built up by adding layers of bricks from the bottom upwards. In this case, the stone cutters had to work from top downwards. List the problems that stone cutters may have faced. Right, the Durga temple at Aihole, built about 1400 years ago. How were stupas and temples built? There were several stages in building a stupa or a temple. Usually kings or queens decided to build this as it was an expensive affair. First, good quality stone had to be found, quarried and transported to the place that was often carefully chosen for the new building. Here, these rough blocks of stone had to be shaped and curved into pillars and panels for walls, floors and ceilings, and then this had to be placed in precisely the right position. Kings and queens probably spent money from their treasury to pay the craftsperson who worked to build these splendid structures. Besides, when devotees came to visit the temple or the stupa, they often brought gifts, which were used to decorate the buildings. For example, an association of ivory workers paid for one of the beautiful gateways at Sanchi. Among the others who paid for decorations were merchants, farmers, garland makers, perfumers, smiths, and hundreds of men and women who are known only by their names, which were inscribed on pillars, railings, and walls. So when you got a chance to visit any of these buildings, remember how several hundreds of people probably worked to construct and decorate them. Now painting. Find Ajanta on map 7. This is a place where several caves were hollowed out of the hills over centuries. Most of these were monasteries for Buddhist monks and some of them were decorated with paintings. Here are some examples. As the caves are dark inside, most of these paintings were done in the light of torches. The colors, which are vivid even after 1500 years, were made of plants and minerals. The artists who created this splendid work of art remain unknown. So paintings from Ajanta. This is a painting of Ajanta. The world of books. Some of the best known epics were written during this period. Epics are grand, long compositions about heroic men and women and include stories about gods. A famous Tamil epic The Silapadikaram was composed by a poet named Lingo around 1800 years ago. It is a story of a merchant named Kovalan who lived in Puhar and fell in love with a courtesan named Madhavi, neglecting his wife Kanangi. Later, he and Kanangi left Puhar and went to Madurai, where he was wrongly accused of theft by the court jewelry of the Pandya king. The king sentenced Kovalam to death. Kanagi, who still loved him, was full of grief and anger at this injustice and destroyed the entire city of Madurai. Our descriptions from the Silapadikaram. Here is how the poet described Kanangi's grief. Oh, witness of my grief, you cannot console me. Is it right that your body, fairer than fairer than pure gold, lies unwashed here in the dust? Is it just that in the red glow of the twilight your handsome chest, framed with a flower wreath, lies thrown down on the bare earth, while I remain alone, helpless, and abandoned to despair? Is there no God? Is there no God in this country? Can there be a God in a land where the sword of the king is used for the murder of innocent strangers? Is there no God, no God? Another Tamil epic, the Kalai, was composed by Satanar around 1400 years ago. This describes the story of the daughter of Kovalan and Madhavi. This beautiful composition were lost to scholars for many centuries, till their manuscripts were rediscovered about 100 years ago. Other writers such as Kalidasa, about whom you read in chapter 10, wrote in Sanskrit, recording and preserving old stories. A number of Hindu religious stories that were in circulation earlier were written down around the same time. These include the Puranas. Purana literally means old. The Puranas contain stories about gods and goddesses, such as Vishnu, Shiva, Durga, or Parvati. They also contain details on how they were to be worshipped. Besides, there are accounts about the creations of the world and about kings. The Puranas were written in simple Sanskrit verse and were meant to be heard by everybody, including women and Shudras who were not allowed to study the Vedas. They were probably recited in temples by priests, and people came to listen to them. Two Sanskrit epics, the Mahabharata and Ramayana, had been popular for a very long time. Some of you may be familiar with these stories. The Mahabharata is about a war fought between the Kauravas and the Pandavas, who were cousins. This was a war to gain control of the throne of the Kurus and their capital. Hastinapura, the story itself was an old one, but was written down in the form in which we know it today, about 1500 years ago. Both the Puranas and the Mahabharata are supposed to have been compiled by Vyasas. The Bhagavad Gita, about which you learnt in chapter 9, was also included in the Mahabharata. The Ramayana is about Rama, a prince of Koshala, who was sent into exile. His wife Sita was abducted by the king of Lanka, named Ravana, and Rama had to fight a battle to get her back. He won and returned to Ayodhya, the capital of Koshala, after his victory. Like the Mahabharata, this was an old story that was now written down. Valmiki is recognized as the author of the Sanskrit Ramayana. Stories told by ordinary people. Ordinary people also told stories, composed poems and songs, sang, danced, and performed plays. Some of these are preserved in collections of stories such as the Jatakas and the Panchatantra, which were written down around this time. Stories from the Jatakas were often shown on the railings of the stupas and in paintings and plays such as Ajanta. Here is one such story. So read the story, students, and you will find out. Now, writing books on science. This was also the time when Aryabhatta, a mathematician and astronomer, wrote a book in Sanskrit known as the Aryabhatyam. He stated that day and night were caused by the rotation of the earth on its axis. Even though it seems as if the sun is rising and setting every day, he developed a scientific explanation for eclipses as well. He also found a way of calculating the circumference of a circle, which is nearly as accurate as a formula we use today. Varahamihara, Brahmagupta, and Bhaskaracharya were some other mathematicians and astronomers who made several discoveries. Try to find out more about them. 0. While numerals had been used earlier, mathematicians in India now invented a special symbol for 0. This system of counting was adopted by the Arabs and then spread to Europe. It continues to be in use throughout the world. Ayurveda. Ayurveda is a well-known system of health science that was developed in ancient India. The two famous practitioners of Ayurveda in ancient India were Charaka and Shushruta. Charak Samhita, written by Charaka, is a remarkable book on medicine. In this treatise, Shushruta speaks about elaborate surgical procedures. So this is the end of the chapter. I hope so you have understood the chapter. So students, take care of yourself and thank you so much.